Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we're talking about the death of the Coupe. Yes, that's non-sporty cars with two doors. We've got a lot of transportation stuff coming up this season, so we're going to start with the small, sedate, non-sporty Coupe that you can't ever hardly find anymore. Well, we're going to talk all about it and why SUVs have taken over everything. So, it's a special episode, Season 2 of the Cameron Journal podcast. Let's go. This is the Cameron Journal podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal podcast.
Have much more in this small Chrysler than great comfort at a most pleasant price. I have great confidence, for which there can be no price. In Cordova, I have what I need.
Hello. There we go. I've been an observer of cars for a few decades. I grew up on road trips with my parents, and back in the 90s, we didn't have iPads. We thought we were fancy when we got iPods, and I was well into high school for that. Back in the day, I had a CD player, a bunch of batteries, and the world passing me by for entertainment. Oh, and those books with the magic pen where you could solve puzzles. This gave me a lot of time to watch the cars pass by, and I got pretty good at recognizing different manufacturers and their body styles. This is a skill that I've kept into adulthood. I like to notice things about cars. I've had the chance to be a delivery driver for dealerships, and I worked at an independent repair shop for a couple years. For someone who wasn't really that enamored with driving, I've spent a great deal of my life dealing with cars. So today we're going to continue our transportation theme this season and talk about the Coupe, or Coupe if you're British.
He gets the same fun as in the going feeling in Chevrolet's Impala Coupe with its beautiful body by Fisher. Nothing on land can quite match the enjoyment you get behind the wheel of a Chevrolet, especially when you and the family leave your everyday cares behind and head for the peace and quiet of the country.
I want to tell you, my new Fury looks a lot longer this year and a lot wider. In fact, it's 4 inches wider inside.
George, honey, it's 3 inches wider.
3? Right. Hey, my new Fury's got more lights than the average 6-room
George,
house.
a 5-room house, dear.
5?
A beautiful car to come to. For 1975, Dodge has given Monaco all the classic styling you'd expect to find in the finest luxury car.
Coupes are instantly recognizable. 2 doors, lower roof lines, usually a long nose and a short trunk deck for a more sporty look and to give maximum interior room. This style of car has produced some of the most iconic cars in American roadways. However, they are slowly disappearing. One of the things I've noticed, and it certainly has been written about, is the death of the Coupe. That is, non-sports cars with only 2 doors. Even among sports cars, some of the best sports cars today have 4 doors. This is not to say that you can't get a coupe-style car. You can. Mercedes has several, but they are specifically sporty. They're made for performance. That's just how they're styled. They get bigger engines. I'm talking about the non-sport coupe. This everyday driver that happens to only have 2 doors. For decades, these cars were all over the roads. Slowly, over time, they have disappeared. Jalopnik started writing about this back in 2010, asking who killed the sports coupe. And we're not really sure who killed the coupe, but the tastes of Americans have changed since the 1950s. Back then, the big three even produced family station wagons with 2 doors, especially in their entry-level models. 4 doors for family cars became somewhat standard by the 1970s, but companies like Ford were still selling coupes that accommodate passengers. The 2+2 style was an option on Mustangs till the 1980s. This version of the Mustang, particularly the Mustang II, which debuted in 1973 as a smog-compliant replacement for the popular car, had the wider back seat and slightly longer wheelbase for rear passengers. The coupe version of any car would be standard until recently. Saturn had several coupe models that were sporty-looking but were not sports cars as such. Even the Chrysler K cars had coupe versions of the popular Valiant. Ford made the Ford Escort primarily as a coupe with a sedan version offered later. Coupes were everywhere, and they were marketed to specific people. Coupes were often marketed to the young without children, or those whose children had moved out and needed a quote-unquote personal car or a quote-unquote pleasurable drive. In the 1950s, the big three even made cars specifically for salesmen with back seats removed so that they could store their samples in an easy-to-reach area rather than the trunk. They often were cheaper, although not always, and were great entry-level cars for young people. The marketing from the period was clear. Ditch the bulky 4-door sedan for something more fun and even sporty. The non-sporty coupe was a great way to get a nice car at just the right size for a certain kind of lifestyle. The lifestyle of not having too many passengers. The coupe had global appeal as well.
$1977 is your year to make the move to Matador. Matador Coupe from AMC. As always, you'll get Matador's award-winning styling, but this year you'll also get more. More comfort, more convenience, and more value for your money. Because this year's Matador Coupe offers more features as standard equipment than before. You get more because there's more to an AMC. And that makes it one of the best values of any 1977 automobile.
We knew what we wanted this year was a family car that was still stylish and not too large. We knew about Matador's styling, but what we didn't realize was that even though it has the length of an intermediate-sized car, it's almost as big inside as a full-size 2-door sedan.
That means room and comfort.
What really made up our minds in a hurry, though, was finding out about all the extra things that were standard this year.
And American Motors' new Buyer Protection Plan, too.
Buyer Protection Plan 2, new for 1977. American Motors has expanded its already comprehensive program to give new car buyers even greater confidence and satisfaction. There is more to an AMC. Let's be clear about just what that means when you're looking at Matador Coupe. This year, American Motors has taken a long list of
the new Ford Granada Sports Coupe, another remarkable achievement. Besides the resemblance, it's one of the few American cars to offer the option of 4-wheel disc brakes, and it comes with heavy-duty suspension, floor shift, reclining buckets, and more.
When the Japanese auto manufacturers began their push into the American market, they offered simple, cheap, and reliable cars which mostly came with 2 doors except for a few sedan models. These early Toyotas, Hondas, and Subarus would often become quite popular, especially in their subsequent generations, released in the 1980s and 1990s. It is important to point out that the death of the coupe is a distinctly American phenomenon. In Europe, car tastes are different, especially due to tax purposes. Small coupes like the Renault Clio remain popular sellers, as does the VW Golf, especially among younger drivers. However, the hot hatch, a car with 5 doors, pretty much rules the European roadways. It seems like even the Europeans have started to embrace the 4-door model of car. So why is this? It's not as if companies haven't made some truly great 2-door cars. They have. There were some truly impressive coupes that will make gearheads light up. I'll go through these slowly. The Honda Prelude, which was one of my favorite cars. the Acura Legend and its replacement, the Acura RSX, the Mazda Miata, a favorite driver's car and a perfect entry-level sports car, the Honda S2000, the Honda Accord Coupe with a manual transmission. Honda killed off most of its manuals for the 2021 model year. The Honda Civic Coupe, you'll still see some dudes driving around those like a street-legal go-kart. The Toyota MR2. I had a buddy who had an 86 MR2. It was a real money pit, as I told him it would be, because the car was exactly as old as he was, but it was still a great car in its day. The Toyota Celica, which came out in 3 different generations and is still iconic and beloved. The Ford Thunderbird. The remake of the Thunderbird was a bit of a flop, but it was an iconic car for decades. The Chevy Nova wasn't considered a sports car in its day, but it was very much a daily driver. Now it's really popular for dropping in all sorts of big block Chevys. People like to LS swap them, upgrade them. You can do anything with them, particularly if you stay in like the Chevy universe of parts. The VW Beetle, an absolutely iconic car that finally ceased production in most of the world after 3 generations spanning 75 years. Another personal favorite, the VW Scirocco, was a popular and iconic car from the late 70s. It had a recent kind of revival in 2017. It didn't sell very well and they axed it, but it was, when they announced it, I was super excited. I wanted one, all this type of thing. The Chevy Beretta came out of the 80s. It was marketed as a sports car, but it was no Camaro. Certainly not. I mean, GM made better sports cars, but it was still like a great daily driver. There was a Buick Skylark coupe that was quite popular for a long while, especially among folks of a certain generation. It was a coupe version of the LeSabre, but it was a very nice, very well-appointed car. You'll notice that I haven't really mentioned any of the major sports car models except for the Mustang II and the Miata. There's a reason for that. Sports cars and sport coupes aren't necessarily really meant for daily driving. The back seats, if they have them, are decorative. The cars I'm talking here were meant to function. Most of the mainline sedan models also had a coupe version. Even big, bulky American land yachts like the Lincoln Continental, Buick Riviera, Cadillac DeVille had coupe models. They were large, in charge, and did it all with only 2 doors. Ads featured carefree people driving them around, possibly with friends or sometimes as a family, depending on the targeting of the ad. Life seemed possible with only 2 doors, but no longer. These days, times have changed. 2 doors are out. Hell, even sedans are getting more rare on the roads. I appreciate the perspective of Drive Tribe. The coupe is just dying out. However, some rather interesting replacements have come around. For instance, some companies have tried producing coupe SUVs. The SUV is an important part to this story, so bear that in mind. It's going to be important a little bit later. I think the primary problem with the 2-door lifestyle is having 2 doors is a pain in the ass for everyday functioning, and I get that. I've owned a 2-door car before. I had a 2nd generation VW Beetle. It was a 2001 TDI diesel, the so-called new Beetle, and having only 2 doors was not so much fun, especially when it came to carrying things like laundry to the laundromat or even groceries. I moved from Denver to Washington in this car, and packing it from the back and sides was certainly an adventure. The back seat stayed mostly laid down, and I put stuff in the back from the hatch. Made the most sense, but I did have to crawl into the car to get the stuff that had rolled forward. And this was why when that car died, I insisted on getting 4 doors. I ended up with my first Audi A6, but that's a story for another day. The point is, the same reason why I gave up on the 2 doors and switched to 4 doors is the same reason everyone else did. 4 doors is just easier to get things in and out of. And people too. Consumers are a practical bunch, and practicality is essential when buying a car. You're going to be paying for it for a while. You have to use it every day in most of the country. 2-door cars look nice, but they aren't very convenient. And that brings us to what really killed most coupes and many cars in general, the SUV.
Here, Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe has been named Motor Trend Car of the Year.
The new Acura Legend Coupe. Coming soon. Exclusively at your Acura dealer.
If you're looking for a 2-door car, you won't have to look far. They can be found. BMW has a few in the 4 Series, like the 430i and multiple variants. However, these don't always look that great, and they're often sports models with stiff suspension and limited rear seating. They also sport the low roof lines that make Coupe so sporty. However, many of the best sports cars of today have 4 doors. Many consumers can afford to have a car for road trips, touring, or just for fun and track days. These days, a car has to do it all. A BMW M3 has to be both sporty and still able to pick up everybody from the bar when it's your turn to drive. It has to be fast, have great suspension, and still get the team to and from a meeting with clients. The death of the Coupe is likely simple pragmatism on the side of car buyers. Cars need to do it all these days, and it's easier to do it with 4 doors. Who has the money to keep a car just for weekends and pleasurable driving? Not many people, that's who. However, there's another culprit to the death of the Coupe, and it also used to come with only 2 doors, and that's the SUV. When SUVs first came out, they only had 2 doors. The first Jeeps had only 2 doors, and even when Jeep pivoted to more civilian models, especially after being bought by Chrysler in the 80s after the demise of AMC, early SUVs all had 2 doors. This was also true for models like the Chevy Blazer, which had a 2-door model well into the early 2000s. As more families embraced the SUV instead of the minivan, 4-door models began to appear. The Jeep Grand Cherokee has certainly set this trend. When the Japanese automakers began to introduce their own SUVs, they hopped right on the 4-door trend with the 4Runner from Toyota or the RAV4 as well. The SUV takeover of the American roadway is nearly complete. If you look out on the highways today, nearly everything is an SUV. European automakers tried to sell hot hatches in America like they did in Europe, but no one was having them. It wasn't until Mercedes got the bright idea to raise the suspension and make SUV versions of their popular hot hatches that they took right off. The small SUV is a popular seller. It's just a regular car, slightly higher off the ground and with different suspension. There's even coupe SUVs. Wouldn't it be easier to drive a regular car that's a little bit closer to the ground? Of course not, because it's not young people that buy new cars. It's older people, and they like something that's easy to get in and out of without having to stress out artificial knees and hips. My joints are working splendidly, at least for now, and I also fell into this trap, which leads us into looking at why everything has to be an SUV these days. It's not just the coupe that's dying, it's the sedan and pretty much everything that's not an SUV.
The super look of Super Coupe. Maybe you need the versatility of a station wagon with an optional power liftgate release.
Just like how everything is a hot hatch in Europe, Americans love their SUVs. And true confession, I bought a new car in 2020, and I bought a Subaru Forester, which recently won an award for the best small SUV under $20,000. I was tempted to buy another Audi, and a nice guy on Reddit found me one within my budget that was only a few years old, but I wanted off the expensive German car expense train. I was looking for space and reliability, and the Forester offered both. Subarus tend to last if you take care of them. My dad drives a 1993 Legacy wagon, and besides some exhaust system issues, it's running just fine. I bought mine and promptly put 5,000 trouble-free miles on it moving back to the West Coast. The case for the crossover SUV that's sometimes a car and sometimes an SUV is very real. I love having seats that lay down. I can move stuff with it. It has 4 doors, of course, and it's easy to pack on a road trip. I can just put stuff in the very back and be on my way. I can shop till I drop and never wonder how I'm going to fit it all in the car. When I arrived in Seattle, I bought nearly the entirety of IKEA, and I put it all in my car without any fuss. I love a good sedan. I even love a good coupe, but the utility of the CUV or crossover SUV just can't be beat. And that's what we have to conclude about the coupe. There was nothing wrong with them. People changed, life changed, and it's easier to navigate all the different things life might throw at you with a car that can do it all. I could have children and not need to buy a new car. I can pick up friends from the airport or use it to move most of my stuff across town. It's great for a road trip, and I could even sleep in my Forester if I really wanted to. These are all things the coupe couldn't really handle. The SUV and the CUV do present some problems. They aren't terribly sporty. The best sports cars need to be much lower to the ground to get up to high speeds and reduce rollover risk. The gas mileage situation is quite dire. One of the biggest complaints about the Forester from other drivers and myself is the aberrant gas mileage. I get 16 to 18 in the city and 25 on the highway. It's great for long distances, but terrible around town. As we face climate change and need to move away from fossil fuels, powering our metal behemoths with electricity is no easy thing. Tesla has recently released a small SUV using their popular electric platform. Hydrogen is still being tested as a potential fuel source whose byproduct is water, something we're also running out of. Could be something there. In the early 2000s, automakers couldn't make SUVs big enough, and they produced some truly giant SUVs. Ford put out the Expedition and the Excursion. The Excursion came with a diesel engine as default and was axed in 2009. Nissan had the Armada, which is still in production, and even the Japanese made ever larger SUVs. Both Toyota and Honda biggered their popular models like the Pilot from Honda and the 4Runner from Toyota. After the Great Recession, smaller, cheaper, and fuel-efficient cars were popular for a moment, but once many car buyers had recovered from the dark days of 2008 to 2011, those small cars were handed down to new drivers in the family or traded in for SUVs. The SUV has come a long way, but will we ever look at them with the same romantic eye as a coupe? Or will they always be, in the words of someone I met once at a cigar lounge, basic transportation appliances? Now the coupe is in the domain of the sports car. It's all about performance and sometimes touring, but not necessarily in everyday use. Car enthusiasts might keep one around for track days on the weekend, but you'll be pressed to find one in the street. These days, I see coupes mostly in the hands of young people who use their performance car as a daily driver as well.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America's asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all. On a highway or a road along a levee. Performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA. See it in your Chevrolet.
Traveling east, traveling west. Wherever you go, Chevy service is best. Southward or north, near place or far, there's a Chevrolet dealer for your Chevrolet car.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. The Rockies way out west are calling you. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA, where fields of golden wheat pass and review. Whether traveling light or with a load that's heavy, performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA and see it in your Chevrolet.
Perhaps that's what we're missing from modern cars. We're missing romance. We're missing excitement and possibility in favor of practicality. We don't have the luxury of being frivolous. We have to be pragmatic. And perhaps that is why the coupe has been relegated to the sports car segment, a reserve of people who can afford to not have a practical vehicle as their daily driver or can afford to have an extra car for touring and track days. In some ways, that's America as a whole. We don't hope the way we used to hope. We're pragmatic. If it's working, then we keep doing it. And if it's not working, then we stop doing it. And one thing that has taken the axe of pragmatism is the coupe. The coupe is dead. Long live the coupe. That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal Podcast.